The orbital refuge known as Star Shelter Station drifted silently above a pale blue gas giant at the far edge of civilized space. Its enormous rings filled with refugees, traders, and creatures from dozens of different star systems who had nowhere else to go. Built centuries earlier as a neutral sanctuary after a devastating galactic war, Star Shelter had one simple rule. Anyone could seek safety there, as long as they followed the laws of peace. Yet, even in a place designed for tolerance, there were limits. Some beings were simply too feared, too hated, or too dangerous for the residents to ever truly accept. And none were more despised than the creature locked inside Containment Hangar 7. Every being on the station knew about it. The guards avoided the corridor whenever possible. Merchants whispered about it with fear. Even veteran soldiers lowered their voices when speaking its name. Inside that reinforced chamber lived a dragon, one of the last surviving members of a species blamed for the destruction of entire fleets during the ancient war. Most people simply called it the Black Wraith. The dragon had arrived at Star Shelter nearly 2 years earlier, captured by a coalition patrol and delivered to the station under heavy guard. It was enormous, even by dragon standards, its scales dark as burned metal and scarred from countless battles. One of its wings had been permanently damaged, leaving it unable to fly long distances, and several broken horns curved jaggedly from its head like shattered blades. But what frightened people most were its eyes. 2 glowing amber orbs filled not with rage, but with something far worse, cold silence. The dragon never roared, never lashed out wildly, never begged or pleaded. It simply watched the world through the reinforced glass of its containment chamber, day after day, unmoving. To most residents of the station, that silence felt more terrifying than any display of anger. Many believed the creature was simply waiting for the right moment to escape and unleash devastation once again. Because of that fear, the dragon had been completely isolated. Food was delivered automatically through mechanical systems. Medical checks were performed remotely. No one spoke to it. No one approached the containment barrier longer than necessary. In the entire population of Star Shelter Station, only one person ever voluntarily entered Hangar 7. His name was Daniel Hayes, a quiet human maintenance engineer responsible for keeping the station's aging structural systems functioning. Daniel wasn't famous, wealthy, or powerful. He spent most of his time repairing old wiring grids, calibrating gravity plates, and crawling through service shafts that most people didn't even know existed. But unlike most of the station's residents, Daniel had never fought in the old war and had grown up hearing stories from both sides of the conflict. To him, dragons weren't monsters. They were simply another species that had been caught in a brutal era of fear and retaliation. The first time Daniel entered Hangar 7, it wasn't out of curiosity or bravery. The station's central environmental system had malfunctioned, and several containment areas, including the dragon's chamber, were experiencing unstable temperature fluctuations. As the assigned engineer, Daniel had no choice but to investigate. The moment the massive reinforced doors slid open, he felt the heavy tension in the air. Even the automated security turrets seemed to hum with nervous energy. Daniel stepped slowly inside, toolkit in hand, scanning the temperature monitors along the walls. Then he looked up and saw the dragon watching him. The creature's enormous body rested quietly in the center of the chamber, its dark wings folded around itself like a protective cloak. The amber eyes followed Daniel's every movement, calm and unblinking. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly and crouched beside a wall console. Hey there," he muttered quietly while checking the system readings. "Just here to fix the climate controls." The dragon's gaze didn't change. It simply continued observing him in silence. Most people would have felt paralyzed under that stare, but Daniel mostly felt curious. The creature didn't look like a mindless monster preparing to attack. Instead, it looked exhausted, lonely. As he worked, Daniel couldn't help glancing back occasionally. "You know," he said casually after a moment, tightening a loose wiring connection, "people talk about you like you're some unstoppable nightmare." The dragon blinked slowly but remained still. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Honestly, though, you just look bored." That comment earned the first reaction anyone on the station had seen from the dragon in months. Its massive tail shifted slightly across the floor with a soft scraping sound. The amber eyes narrowed just a little, as if considering the strange human kneeling near the wall. Daniel finished adjusting the temperature regulators and stood up, brushing dust from his uniform. "There we go," he said, checking the monitor display. "Should keep the temperature stable now." For a moment he hesitated before leaving. Then he did something no one else on the station had ever done. He stepped closer to the containment barrier separating him from the dragon. The reinforced transparent wall hummed quietly with energy fields strong enough to stop heavy weapons fire. Still, standing that close to the creature made Daniel aware of just how enormous it really was. The dragon lifted its head slightly, studying him. "You know," Daniel said thoughtfully, resting one hand on the glass, "being locked in here all the time must be pretty miserable." The dragon didn't respond outwardly, but its gaze softened ever so slightly. Daniel sighed quietly. "I can't open the door or anything. Station rules." He paused, then gave a small apologetic shrug. "But I can stop by sometimes. Talk a bit. Might make the place less boring." For the first time since its arrival on Star Shelter Station, the black wraith lowered its head slowly until its massive snout hovered inches from the other side of the barrier. Its amber eyes studied the human carefully, searching for any trace of fear or deception. Instead it found something extremely rare, simple, honest curiosity. Outside Hangar 7, security cameras captured the entire moment. Within hours, the footage had spread quietly through the station's internal network. Residents stared in disbelief at the recording of a human engineer casually speaking to the most feared dragon in the galaxy, as if it were an old neighbor. Guards shook their heads in confusion. Traders argued about whether the man had lost his mind. But the strangest detail was the dragon itself. For the first time in years, the black wraith no longer looked like a silent statue waiting for destruction. It looked attentive, as if someone had finally acknowledged its existence after years of isolation. Daniel Hayes left the hangar a few minutes later, completely unaware that half the station was already discussing the strange interaction. As far as he was concerned, he had simply fixed a broken system and chatted with a lonely creature for a few minutes. But that simple act of kindness, something no one else on Star Shelter had been willing to show, was about to change everything. Because the dragon the galaxy hated most had just met the first being in years who didn't look at it with fear. And in a place like Star Shelter Station, that was the beginning of a story that would soon leave the entire galaxy stunned. By the next morning, the quiet encounter inside Hangar 7 had already become the most talked about event on Star Shelter Station. The security footage of Daniel Hayes casually standing near the containment barrier and speaking to the infamous Black Wraith had spread across internal networks like wildfire. Workers replayed the video in crowded cafeterias, merchants whispered about it behind their stalls, and off-duty security officers argued over whether the human engineer had just performed the bravest or the most foolish act anyone had ever seen on the station. For nearly 2 years, the dragon had been nothing more than a silent symbol of fear, an untouchable relic from the ancient war. Yet the footage clearly showed something no one expected, the dragon reacting. Not violently, not aggressively, simply paying attention. That small detail disturbed people more than they cared to admit. Because if the monster everyone feared was capable of calm awareness, then perhaps their understanding of it had always been incomplete. Daniel, however, remained completely unaware of the controversy swirling around him. He started his shift like any other day, sipping lukewarm station coffee while reviewing maintenance requests on a cracked datapad in the engineering corridor. Broken air recyclers in Dock Ring 3, faulty gravity plating in Residential Sector 9, and a flickering power conduit in. He paused when he saw the location listed. Containment Hangar 7. Daniel raised an eyebrow and chuckled quietly. "Well, guess I'm going back," he muttered to himself. The environmental regulators inside the dragon's chamber were still reporting slight fluctuations, which meant another inspection was required. To Daniel, it was just another repair job. But to the rest of the station, it looked like the human engineer was voluntarily walking straight back into the presence of the most hated dragon in the galaxy. When the massive reinforced doors of Hangar 7 slid open again, the atmosphere inside felt different. The enormous chamber was quiet as always, lit by dim overhead panels and lined with heavy security turrets, but something had changed. The black wraith was no longer lying motionless at the center of the floor like a forgotten statue. Instead, the dragon was awake, its massive wings partially folded while its amber eyes focused directly on the entrance. It had been waiting. Daniel noticed immediately. "Oh, hey again," he said casually, stepping inside with his toolkit. The dragon's head tilted slightly, studying him. For a moment the two simply observed each other, a silent understanding hanging in the air. Then Daniel walked over to the maintenance console near the barrier and began checking the system diagnostics. "Temperature readings look better today," he said aloud while tapping the screen. "Still a little unstable though." Behind the transparent containment wall, the black wraith shifted its massive body slightly closer. The sound of its claws scraping across the reinforced floor echoed through the hangar. If anyone else had been standing there, they might have panicked instantly. But Daniel barely reacted. He glanced over his shoulder briefly and shrugged. "Yeah, I know. This place isn't exactly comfortable." The dragon stopped just a few meters from the barrier, lowering its enormous head again so its glowing eyes were level with the human. Daniel finished adjusting a cable and leaned against the console for a moment. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "most people on this station think you're just waiting for a chance to destroy everything." The dragon blinked slowly, its expression unreadable. Daniel sighed. "Honestly, though, if I'd been locked in a room for 2 years with nobody talking to me, I'd probably want to break things too." That statement caused another subtle reaction. The dragon's tail moved again, this time with a slow, thoughtful rhythm rather than restless irritation. Daniel noticed and chuckled quietly. "Hey, I'm just saying." He walked a little closer to the barrier again, examining the environmental emitters mounted along the wall. As he worked, he kept talking casually, as if the dragon were simply another coworker listening nearby. "You'd be surprised how much equipment breaks on this station. Half the wiring systems were installed before humans even discovered faster-than-light travel." The dragon remained silent, but its attention never left him. Daniel eventually finished the repair and wiped grease from his hands with a cloth. "All right, climate regulators should behave now." Instead of leaving immediately, he hesitated again. Something about the dragon's expression made him pause. It didn't look threatening. If anything, it looked curious, almost cautious. Daniel stepped closer to the barrier once more, resting his hand against the transparent wall like he had done the previous day. The dragon lowered its massive snout again until it hovered inches away on the other side. Their eyes met through the reinforced glass. "You know," Daniel said quietly, "everyone calls you the Black Wraith like you're some kind of ghost story." He tilted his head slightly while studying the creature's scarred wings and broken horns. "But you've got more battle damage than half the veterans on this station. That usually means someone fought hard to survive." For the first time, the dragon's expression visibly shifted. The amber glow in its eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by something deeper, something older than anger. A memory, perhaps. Daniel noticed the change immediately. "Yeah," he said softly. "War leaves marks on everyone." Neither of them moved for several seconds. The enormous dragon and the ordinary human engineer simply stood there in silence, separated by a barrier built from fear and centuries of misunderstanding. Finally, Daniel pushed himself away from the wall and slung his toolkit over his shoulder. "Well, I should probably get back to work before my supervisor starts wondering where I disappeared to." As he turned toward the exit, the dragon made a sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was quieter than that, a deep, rumbling exhale that echoed softly through the chamber. Daniel stopped mid-step and glanced back. The dragon was still watching him, its head slightly lowered. "What?" Daniel asked with a faint smile. "You want me to visit again?" The dragon didn't answer in any obvious way, but its tail tapped the floor once, slowly. Daniel chuckled. "All right then." He pointed casually toward the door. "Same time tomorrow." When Daniel left Hangar 7 that day, He once again had no idea how significant the moment had been. Hidden cameras had recorded the entire interaction, and this time the footage spread far beyond the station's internal network. News ships orbiting nearby trade routes picked up the story within hours. Across several star systems, people watched the strange recording of a human maintenance worker speaking calmly to the most feared dragon in the galaxy, and the dragon listening. Military commanders, historians, and political leaders all studied the footage with disbelief. Because if the Black Wraith could respond peacefully to a single act of kindness, then perhaps the galaxy had misunderstood the last surviving war dragon for a very long time. And the human who had chosen to treat it like a living being instead of a monster was about to become the center of a story that would shake Star Shelter Station, and eventually the entire galaxy. Dragon. By the third day, the entire population of Star Shelter Station was watching Daniel Hayes whether he realized it or not. What had begun as a strange curiosity had now turned into a phenomenon. The maintenance engineer who casually spoke with the most feared dragon in the galaxy had become the subject of endless debate across every sector of the station. Traders paused their negotiations just to replay security recordings. Refugees gathered around public screens whispering theories. Some believed Daniel was unbelievably brave, while others insisted he was dangerously reckless. But the people who watched the footage most carefully were the station's security commanders and the interstellar authorities who had originally ordered the Black Wraith's containment. They had spent years studying the dragon's behavior and had always reached the same conclusion. The creature was unpredictable and potentially catastrophic. Yet the new recordings clearly showed something that did not fit their expectations. Whenever Daniel entered Hangar 7, the dragon did not behave like a trapped weapon. It behaved like a being paying attention to someone it trusted. That morning Daniel walked through the industrial corridors with his usual quiet focus, unaware that several station security officers were observing him through monitoring cameras. His boots echoed softly against the metal floor as he carried his familiar worn toolkit. Another maintenance request had appeared in his schedule, once again from Hangar 7. This time, however, the request wasn't about temperature controls. It was a structural vibration warning coming from the containment barrier itself. Daniel frowned slightly while reading the report. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "That's not something you want failing next to a dragon." Despite the seriousness of the issue, his tone remained calm. To him, it was simply another piece of equipment that needed repair. But several security officers watching from the control room exchanged uneasy looks. If the containment barrier truly had a structural flaw, then sending a single engineer into that chamber might be extremely risky. Yet station protocol required the assigned technician to inspect the system before more drastic measures could be taken. When the enormous blast doors of Hangar 7 slid open again, Daniel stepped inside with the same relaxed posture he had shown during the previous visits. But the moment he entered, he realized something was different. The Black Wraith was not resting at the center of the chamber like before. Instead, the massive dragon was standing near the containment barrier itself, its enormous wings partially spread as if it had been moving around the room. The amber eyes immediately locked onto Daniel. For a moment, the engineer paused, surprised. "Whoa," he said softly. "You're a lot closer to the door today." The dragon tilted its head slightly, watching him with that same steady gaze. Daniel scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hope that doesn't mean you're planning something dramatic," he added jokingly. The dragon slowly lowered its wings again and settled down near the barrier, its giant body folding carefully against the floor. The movement seemed deliberate, almost reassuring. Daniel walked over to the structural console mounted along the wall and began scanning the diagnostic readings. The system displayed several warning indicators blinking in red. "Ha!" he murmured while examining the screen. "Looks like one of the energy stabilizers is out of alignment." He crouched beside the panel and began removing the outer casing. While working, he glanced occasionally at the dragon, which remained only a few meters away on the other side of the barrier. "You know," Daniel said casually while tightening a connector, "most people think I'm insane for coming in here." The dragon blinked slowly, its massive head lowered slightly closer to the transparent wall. Daniel continued talking as if the creature were simply another technician assisting him. They keep asking why I'm not terrified of you. He paused for a moment and shrugged. Truth is, I don't see much reason to be. The dragon's tail moved gently along the floor, producing a soft metallic scraping sound. Daniel glanced up briefly. Don't get me wrong, he added with a faint grin. You're definitely the biggest coworker I've ever had. As Daniel adjusted the stabilizer coil, the containment barrier flickered faintly. The dragon noticed immediately. Its wings tensed slightly, and it stepped back a short distance from the wall. Daniel saw the movement and raised an eyebrow. Relax, he said calmly. Just recalibrating the field. He tapped a few commands into the console and the energy barrier stabilized again. Glowing with a steady blue light, the dragon slowly returned to its previous position near the glass. Daniel finished securing the final connection and wiped grease from his hands again. There we go, he said. That should keep the field steady. For a moment he simply stood there studying the dragon more closely than before. Up close, the battle scars along the creature's dark scales were even more visible. Deep grooves marked its wings where energy weapons had once struck. One horn had clearly been shattered long ago and had grown back unevenly. You've seen some things, haven't you? Daniel said quietly. The dragon's amber eyes flickered slightly, reflecting the dim light of the chamber. Daniel leaned against the barrier again, resting his hand on the cool surface. People out there think you destroyed entire fleets, he continued. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But looking at you now, you mostly look tired. The dragon slowly lowered its head until its enormous snout hovered inches from Daniel's hand on the other side of the glass. For the first time since its capture, the black wraith made another sound. A low, deep rumble that vibrated through the floor of the hangar. It wasn't threatening. It almost sounded thoughtful. Daniel blinked in surprise. Okay, he said quietly. I'm taking that as progress. What Daniel didn't know was that the control room above the hangar had fallen completely silent. The security officers monitoring the interaction were staring at the screens in disbelief. The dragon that had refused all contact for 2 years was now willingly approaching a human engineer and responding to his voice. One of the officers finally spoke in a hushed tone. That dragon isn't acting like a prisoner anymore. Another officer nodded slowly. No. It's acting like it recognizes him. Back inside the hangar, Daniel picked up his toolkit and prepared to leave again. But before reaching the door, he turned back toward the dragon once more. The massive creature remained near the barrier, watching him closely. Same time tomorrow? Daniel asked casually. For a long moment the dragon didn't move. Then its enormous tail tapped the floor twice. Daniel laughed softly. All right then. He gave a small wave before heading toward the exit. As the hangar doors closed behind him, the black wraith remained where it was, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time since arriving at Star Shelter Station, the dragon was no longer behaving like an isolated weapon waiting for destruction. Something had changed, and across the station, and soon across the wider galaxy, more and more people were beginning to realize that the most hated dragon in existence might not be the monster they had believed it to be. And the human responsible for revealing that truth was still just a quiet engineer who thought he was simply fixing broken machinery. Dragon. Within a week, the strange relationship between Daniel Hayes and the infamous Black Wraith had become the single most controversial subject across Star Shelter Station and far beyond it. News ships orbiting nearby trade routes had picked up the security recordings, and the footage was now spreading through interstellar networks across multiple star systems. Millions of viewers watched in disbelief as a quiet human maintenance engineer calmly spoke with the dragon that entire civilizations had once feared. Experts argued endlessly about what the videos meant. Some military analysts insisted the dragon was manipulating Daniel, patiently gaining his trust before eventually escaping containment. Others believed the opposite, that the dragon's peaceful behavior proved the galaxy had misunderstood its species for generations. But no matter which theory people supported, one thing was undeniable. The creature known as the Black Wraith was no longer acting like the unstoppable monster of legend. And at the center of the entire mystery stood a human who still considered the situation nothing more than an unusual work assignment. That morning Daniel arrived at Hangar 7 earlier than usual, carrying a small portable heater unit and a metal container tucked under his arm. The moment the reinforced doors opened, the massive chamber echoed faintly with the sound of shifting scales. The Black Wraith was already awake, its enormous body positioned near the containment barrier exactly where Daniel had left it the previous day. The dragon lifted its head immediately when the human entered, its amber eyes glowing softly under the dim hangar lights. Daniel noticed and smiled slightly. "You're getting predictable," he said casually while walking toward the maintenance console. "Either that or you've got a better internal clock than the station's computers." The dragon remained silent, but its tail moved slowly along the floor in what was beginning to look suspiciously like recognition. Daniel placed the heater unit beside the barrier and activated it, allowing warm air to flow through the chamber's climate system. "Temperature drops pretty low in here during night cycles," he explained while adjusting the settings. "Figured you might appreciate a little extra heat." The dragon blinked slowly as if processing the unexpected gesture. Then Daniel set the metal container on the floor near the glass wall and opened the lid. Inside were several large slabs of protein nutrient blocks normally distributed to heavy labor crews. "Before you judge me," Daniel added quickly with a grin, "this stuff isn't exactly gourmet, but it's the best thing I could get through the station supply system." The dragon tilted its head slightly, clearly curious about the human's actions. Outside the hangar, however, the situation had become far less peaceful. A military cruiser from the Galactic Defense Council had arrived in orbit around Starshelter Station only hours earlier. Its commander, Admiral Victor Halden, had personally requested a secure communication channel with the station's governing council. The message he delivered was short and direct. The dragon known as the Black Wraith was considered an extreme security risk, and recent footage showing increased activity near its containment chamber had triggered concern across multiple governments. The council was now under pressure to transfer the dragon to a heavily fortified military research facility. Several council members quietly agreed with the decision. After all, if the dragon escaped containment, the consequences could be catastrophic. But others hesitated, especially after seeing how the creature behaved around Daniel Hayes. Back in Hangar 7, Daniel had finished adjusting the heater and sat down on a nearby maintenance crate while reviewing system diagnostics on his datapad. The Black Wraith remained near the barrier, watching him with that same steady gaze it had shown every day since their first meeting. Eventually Daniel glanced up and sighed quietly. "You know," he said, "I've been hearing rumors around the station." The dragon blinked slowly. Daniel leaned back slightly against the crate. "Apparently some very important people out there think you're too dangerous to stay here." The dragon's wings shifted slightly, though its expression remained calm. Daniel shrugged. "Can't say I'm surprised. The galaxy's been afraid of your kind for centuries." For a long moment neither of them moved. Then the dragon slowly stepped closer to the barrier until its massive snout once again hovered inches from the glass. Its amber eyes studied the human carefully, searching his expression. Daniel met that gaze calmly. "If they move you," he said quietly, "I doubt the next place will be as comfortable as this." The dragon's tail tapped the floor once, harder than usual. Daniel noticed and frowned slightly. "Hey!" he said softly, raising his hand against the glass wall again. "I didn't say I agreed with them." That moment, simple as it was, marked a turning point. For the first time, the Black Wraith lifted one enormous claw and placed it gently against the other side of the containment barrier, directly opposite Daniel's hand. The reinforced energy field flickered faintly between them. The dragon's massive claw dwarfed the human's palm, yet the gesture itself was careful and controlled. In the control room above the hangar, security officers watching the live feed stared in stunned silence. None of them had ever witnessed the dragon attempt direct contact before. Daniel blinked in surprise but didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Well, that's new," he murmured. The dragon remained perfectly still, its glowing eyes fixed on his. In that quiet moment, separated only by reinforced glass and an energy field built from fear, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither fully understood yet. Outside the station, The Galactic Defense Council cruiser continued waiting for the official transfer order. Military officials were preparing specialized containment ships designed specifically to transport creatures like the Black Wraith. As far as they were concerned, the decision had already been made. But what none of them had anticipated was the growing reaction across the wider galaxy. Millions of viewers had now seen the recordings of Daniel Hayes speaking calmly with the dragon everyone had once called a monster. Civilian networks were filling with debates, protests, and messages demanding that the dragon not be treated like a weapon anymore. Many people had begun asking a simple question. If a single human mechanic could treat the creature with kindness and receive trust in return, then perhaps the galaxy itself had made a terrible mistake. And inside Hangar 7, as the dragon's enormous claw rested gently against the barrier across from Daniel's hand, the most hated creature in the stars was quietly proving that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't defeating a monster. It was choosing to see the life inside it. Dragon,